The program is Outside the Book, coming to you live from the Southern Kentucky Festival of Books 2014, a special collaboration between WKU-PBS, the Warren County Public Library, Barnes & Noble, and the Soki Book Fest. We're honored to have with us today Chris Raschka, the author of A Ball for Daisy. And Chris, you've won a lot of awards with this book, and it's a children's book. And people may not understand what a challenge it is to write a children's book.
Well, it's a great challenge to find the voice that is right for your audience, and my audience is the youngest, probably from the 2s to the 9-year-olds. And this, A Ball for Daisy, was my first wordless book, so the voice had to really only be carried by the art. And it actually took about 8 years. It was 8 years in the making, which is not unusual. I'm, working on a variety of things at once.
What does research tell us about our 2 through 9-year-olds? How is it that we grab, obviously appealing visuals are going to get the attention of a 2 to 9-year-old?
Well, in fact, I believe it's true that up until you are 5, your eyes are literally still forming. And so one thing that has made me be aware of is to simplify forms, simplify the images, which is something I tend to do anyway. I also like to work very gesturally and do paint spontaneously, so it's not worked over too much. It either works or it doesn't. That was the kind of art that appealed to me when I was a child. I loved the Madeline books by Ludwig Bemelmans, which are very rough, and so that is something I've followed myself.
And so 8 years in the making, it's out there now, it's won awards, and when you get to the finished product, do you say, should have done this, should have done that, yeah?
Of course.
Tweaking?
I'm always happy if I have 1 or 2 moments in the book that got to where I wanted it to be. But one thing that I have learned is to kind of reserve my own judgment and just work as well as I can, and then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and I'm very happy that I can continue to work in the work that I do, and I was quite shocked when it did win the awards that it did. I kind of never dreamed that would happen.
Surprise.
Yes.
So 25 years you've been doing this. How have things changed in that time in the work that you do?
For me personally, in some ways starting out when I didn't know what I was doing was a blessing, because I just was working, creating stuff that was very personal to me. Now, because now there's a little more pressure to create something, a big seller. I have to say I was also blessed with an editor who was very headstrong, very, headstrong, I don't know if that's the right word, but maybe it is the right word. He published what he wanted to publish. Now editors are constrained they really have to, by
economics.
By economics, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. Even
though everyone wants a blockbuster, not every book will be a blockbuster, and not every book should be a blockbuster, of course,
And I would hate to hear that that's the motivation for some and I know I'd be naive to think otherwise, but that some people go in hoping, I'm going to make this a blockbuster.
Right.
And yet you have a certain bar that you have to try to.
I would say in the children's book world, I don't know any cynical writers or illustrators. Everyone is really doing their best work, things that they want to make, and there's really no one is trying to. There might be some trying to get some kind of sneak something in there, but really, the people I know are just doing their work, trying to make good books for children.
Speaking of children, we have a different type of child. Well, at the foundation, kids are kids.
Right.
maybe I'm answering the question myself, but just with so many inputs and so much stimuli and digital works out there, it's a different audience to a certain extent.
Yes. We could get doom and gloomy. I mean, I've read studies that kids who are just looking at digital stuff from a very early age are less adept at reading personal emotion because they don't see it on the faces that they're looking at. They're looking at tablets instead of their moms and dads. That's kind of scary. But on the other hand, I feel like things will work its way out. And it's amazing to me to see that 18-month-old children, 2-year-olds still pick up a book. They still like it. There's something about the form of the book that is still delightful.
And let's hope that continues.
Yeah, let's hope so. Well,
take a
great,
look, right?
Exactly. A lot of books here, a lot of fantastic writers, and this kind of thing is so encouraging. You know, I'm from New York City, and I've been around the country, and there are many wonderful book fests just like this one all over, and it's great to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We've been talking with Chris Raschka, A Ball for Daisy, from the Southern Kentucky Festival of Books. Kentucky-born writer, producer, comedian, jack of all trades, Stevie DuPin is joining us right now. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. You said jack of all trades.
Yeah,
Master
I did.
of
I
one
don't
or
know.
two.
One or two. Let's go with one or two. Because he describes himself as a hillbilly hellraiser. You want to describe what that means?
That's about right. Well, I grew up in Owensboro, Kentucky, not far from here. And by the way, can I first start off by saying I was supposed to go to WKU. I never showed up, so sorry I'm a little late for class, but glad to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you here,
thank
but
you.
You've had an interesting life in between. Talk a little bit about that and how it's influenced you to write the book, The Trans Am Diaries.
Well, from Owensboro, I went down to Panama City, and I did some DJing and hosted all the Wild Spring Break stuff. And of course, I covered my eyes when the girls would flash. Of course I did that. But I always dreamed of going to Hollywood since I was 5 years old. And I'd look around Owensboro, and I'd see my mom working in a factory, and I'd say, "Mom, I want to be on TV." And she'd say, "I think you're eating too many paint chips, kid." But so in '88, I put 2 suitcases in a car and an Elvis King Creole movie poster, and I went to Hollywood. So I struggled for a number of years, 5 years or so, and thought maybe I should have gone to WKU and gotten a little education first. But it all worked out. Got into fitness and started doing fitness videos, and then I wanted to showcase. I can show my dancing and singing and being crazy, so I started doing stand-up comedy. And I did that still doing it for about 15 years.
And it's been quite fruitful for you. But in the interim, life kind of throws you those curveballs, if you want to use that baseball analogy.
Absolutely.
But you had a bout with cancer, and you kind of use that. And anyone who's been touched like that or by cancer knows, just how extreme it can be. But you found a way to find humor in it and make others find that as well.
Yeah, when it first happened, I was shocked because I didn't know anything about prostate cancer. And a lot of people, especially men, don't want to talk about prostate cancer.
And you were young to have been diagnosed with that.
And so I went in, I was in fitness. I've been working out for 25 years. I have an organic garden. So for whatever reason, whatever the powers that be, whether it be environmentally or whatever caused the cancer, I'll never know. But I had 2 little ones, I had a baby, I had a 2-year-old. But 2 years prior to being diagnosed, I'd gone in suspecting something was going on. And because of my age, they didn't do a PSA. They just said, "Oh, you're drinking too much water," or you're going to the bathroom a lot because you're drinking water. I said, "Okay." But 2 years later, I got a blood test, and I did have cancer. And they said that's what it was when you suspected something. But I tell people the silver lining was, in that 2 years, my daughter was born, whose name happens to be Faith.
Aww.
And so if they would have discovered it the first time, shop would be closed, and I wouldn't have my daughter. So all is forgiven for the first doctor that didn't do the PSA. All is forgiven.
Yes, there you go. But and what a beautiful way to look at that, because what could have been just a really ugly place turned into a really nice place to
thank
visit.
you, yeah.
And the sense of humor. Because, you know, a little while ago in one of the other shows from outside the book here, we were talking with an author who talks about animals, and she interviewed a researcher who found that rats laugh.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
He's
cool.
doing research on laughing rats. That having been said, does that not speak to the importance of humor?
That is. I think laughter heals, and that's one way I definitely dealt with it. Writing the book was my therapy. I've been working as a comic for so long, I had to be in constant motion. So when my body was healing, you know, I made my brain work, and it had been a while since it worked. But so I took about 2 years and wrote the book and tried to deal with it, you know, with humor. And I say it's not a cancer book, it's stories of my hell-raising days and hanging out with rock stars. And, you know, I just weave the cancer through the book to keep it kind of light.
Now, you know, humor that's a tough one, because what I find funny, you may not find funny, but then when you're, you know, talking to an audience of 500 people and you have to make them laugh, you've got to get to that common place. How do you do that?
Well, I think people go to comedy clubs, you go to see a comedian to laugh at someone else's pain. You know, if someone's overweight, they say, I can't get a date, you feel better about yourself. But Richard Pryor said the best comedy comes from pain, it comes from honesty. So if you're able to laugh at yourself, then other people will laugh with you. You know, and if people are criticizing you, if you can laugh about whatever they're criticizing about, it takes away their power.
That's true. And you know, we talk a lot in this show, certainly, and at these book festivals, about how technology has changed so much of everything that we do. Has that affected the way people consume humor?
Absolutely. Actually, I was just talking to someone over there about that, because I host an internet talk show myself, the Stevie D show, actorsentertainment.com. Sorry for the plug, but I was just talking about that because I have a lot of comics on, and we talk about how it's different now. We could be working on a bit, working on material, and it's still rusty in the, you know, early stages, but someone would take their cell phone and upload that piece. And it could be something taken out of context. It could be a bit that you're working on that's not polished yet. So it's definitely a new world out there, and you got to be a little bit more prepared when you hit the stage with. You can't just go up there and go, oh, I went to the dentist today, and oh, I think you forgot the Novocaine, and sorry if I'm drooling, you know, whatever it is. You got to be a little more polished, a little more on your game than you used to be.
So what's up for you? You have this show, you've written a book, and what's next?
Well, for about the last 3 or 4 years, I had something called Rockstars of Comedy that came out. And we signed Tommy Lee to host that. It was a DVD concert film with Whitney Cummings from the show Whitney, and Steve Burns from Sullivan and Son. A lot of my friends.
A little name drop in
here.
Yeah.
But it helped sell, you know.
Sure.
And I definitely use my friends that have a huge fan base, and we work together, and I wanted to have a crossover audience. So we're shopping that as a television show. I have other reality shows that I create, and I've got like 7 projects now, so we'll see what sticks.
We'll see what sticks. It's
exactly.
been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you for having me.
You Kentucky boy.
It's good to be back in Bowling Green.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
We've been talking with author Stevie DuPin. Author Tom Hunley joins us now. Tom, it's really great to have you here.
Oh, it's so good to be here.
And you're a professor in your everyday life.
That's true. I teach poetry writing and other things at Western Kentucky University here in Bowling Green.
Well, let's talk a little bit about writing poetry, because that's a little bit different than perhaps writing a novel or something like that. So help us understand what's involved in poetry writing.
Well, I mean, I did write this book, The Poetry Gymnasium, as a way to really break it down for students and people that want to teach themselves to write poetry. Basically, in poetry, you know, you usually don't start out with something you're trying to say. Like, people come in having a message, and usually I say, if you already know what you're going to say, it should be maybe a letter to the editor. So in poetry, it's more about playing around with language in different ways and trying to find a way to surprise yourself. If you surprise yourself, if you say something you didn't expect to say, then other people that read it will be surprised also.
You know, there's the old cliche, and we are taught as children that poetry should rhyme. Where did that come from?
Well, it came from Chaucer. For about 400 years in English language poetry, rhyme was dominant. But our language is not as rhyme-rich as some other languages, and I think all the exact rhymes got used up, and you want your rhymes to be fresh just like you want your metaphors to be fresh. So around the beginning of the 20th century, we had the phenomenon where most poetry was in free verse, and even now, most of the poetry that does rhyme, it's in slant rhymes, where only maybe just the end consonants sound alike, or maybe just the vowels but not both, because there's a whole treasure trove there of rhymes that haven't been used up so much. So rhyme is great. It's just one of the tools we have.
One of the tools. Another one of the tools is the delivery system, the way that people are consuming books now. A lot of them are not actually buying books. They're going online and doing it digitally.
That's true, and there's also still a long tradition of oral poetry, people reading poetry out loud in coffee shops and
bars.
Have
we seen a resurgence in that?
We sure have,
slam?
Absolutely. There's slams, which are competitive, then there are open mics, which are not competitive, just more social. It's always been an important part of poetry, because there was actually poetry before there was print, and I think there will still be poetry after print is gone, if it does go away.
That's encouraging. So that having been said, it sounds like the audience for poetry is still there.
The poetry world needs to keep on working on creating its audience. A lot of poetry is just for other poets nowadays, but there are various groups that are trying to find different avenues to make it, to have more broad appeal. For me, one way to do that is to write about the concerns of your neighbors. I think a lot of people in the poetry world, they've kind of marginalized themselves by writing about issues that are different from what a lot of people are interested in. So for example, I wrote a couple of books about new fatherhood, thinking that a lot of people have been parents and might be interested in that. So that's partly an attempt to try to reach the audience that usually won't pick up poetry books.
But again, that's having a voice and saying something. So in the beginning of the interview, you were talking about how if you go into poetry with the end in mind, that's really not...
The thing is, I wasn't trying to write poems about new fatherhood. I was just trying to play with language, but I was obsessed with new fatherhood, and every single poem ended up being about that. It's kind of how it works. You give yourself something to do with language, and if you're fortunate, you have an obsession, and your unconscious will fill in that content for you.
I love that. That's poetry right there, talking about that. So what's ahead for you? You want to continue to write poetry?
Sure. I'm working on a book of poems, all in the voices of characters from The Simpsons. They're what you call dramatic monologues. So I have 38 of those so far, and I hope to have a full-length book. I mean, there are hundreds of characters. There are actually scholarly books written about The Simpsons, so I'm reading those for research and inspiration, but also just watching the episodes and calling that research.
And calling that research. I love it.
That's been my big project for 3.5 years now.
Well, and there's a lot of people who watch The Simpsons.
Well, that's the idea also. I was talking about trying to broaden the audience for to get people interested. And I do have a chapbook of those, and I've had the experience of people at book fairs like this buying two. They say, I like poetry, but my boyfriend likes The Simpsons, so I'll buy two. Or I have a friend that loves The Simpsons that doesn't really usually read poetry, and that's exactly what I want to have happen. Now the poems, they're in the voices of characters from The Simpsons, but as far as topics, they're about whatever I'm interested in at the time. I'm really finding it's a great vehicle for writing honestly about whatever I want to, while protected by the mask of some character.
I love it. Honesty, indeed. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Continued success.
Thank you so much.
We've been talking with author Tom Hunley. Outside the Book continues from the 2014 Southern Kentucky Festival of Books. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're so glad that you joined us. And a special thanks to our partners in crime in this particular venture. That, of course, is the organizers of the Soki Book Fest, the Warren County Public Library, and Barnes & Noble. And I am honored to close out the show this time with a really great guy, Charles Ghigna. And he's been on the show before. We're happy to have you back here again. And you have a brand new series of books out.
I do. It's a series of books
Schoolhouse.
having the magic schoolhouse theme of numbers, letters, shapes, and sizes. It's called The Little Schoolhouse.
Now, in writing books for children and catering to a certain audience that maybe can't read words necessarily, first of all, that must be very humbling to know that you could be that catalyst that gets that child onto loving words.
That is an exciting and challenging part of the profession. And what is fun is I have to see the pictures in my head because I know somebody's going to draw the pictures. I don't draw, I just write. And to set that up so the kids' imagination pick up from the pictures into the words.
That is challenging. And what people may not realize is that you say you write them and then someone else illustrates them.
Yes.
I think some of us have the preconceived notion that that's done by one person, or as the writer you get to choose the illustrator. Not the case, is it?
Not always. I've been doing it so many years now, though. Sometimes the art directors will show me 2 or 3 illustrators whose work they like, and I get a little input.
they make me feel like I have clout, but they really make all the decisions. And it is a team effort. In fact, the whole idea just started with the alphabet book, and I was coming up with a parade, and the alphabet parade, oh, what a sight to see, a band of marching letters all the way from A to Z. And immediately we had some of the art directors and art illustrators come in and make suggestions. And so it was a team effort, and it's been fun. I learned a lot of things by writing, and one of the things I learned about in the one that has to do with colors, it's called The Wonders of the Color Wheel, and how primary colors and secondary colors mix. And again, even though those are for beginning readers or toddlers, you can take them a little bit farther nowadays than you used to, so it's a lot of fun.
Well, stay right there in being able to take them a little further than you used to be able.
Yes.
Because the gentleman that we were just interviewing, Tom Hunley, who's a poet,
yes.
He has an interesting perspective on that and agrees that children today are not what they used to be.
No, they're not. I think they're they're more bombarded with knowledge every day than we were when we were young, because of all the social media, because of all the electronic devices we have. And even though we say, well, their attention spans might not be as long as ours were when we had a teacher standing in front of a class for 50 minutes, now everything's very quick. But because of that, we're getting more input, and their little minds are just racing. And I think our minds are more capable than what we thought, and we're seeing it in our children and my case, my grandchildren, who inspire most of this.
Well, but that having been said, how then do you capture, it's almost more of a challenge to capture that attention span for the limited amount that you have them.
It is, and I always like to go back to the idea of take something big, but make it small and start small, because it is a quiet moment and a special moment in a child's life, whether they're sitting in their parents' lap or reading on their own, their first books they're reading. And I always try to think of that, and when I'm writing, it's almost like, listen to this, and I want to say it in a whisper to this one child, even though I know that there might be thousands or maybe more children reading the books. Each one is in that small moment when the magic's happening for that child.
And it is really just that intimate, isn't it?
It is, it really is. Just like the magic of how language starts, and it's almost osmosis. We're reading to the child every night, and all of a sudden they're learning the words and not even realizing it, and pretty soon they're reading on their own, and that's when it's really good. So.
Now, you talked about putting words to a book like this.
Yes.
And what about the rhythm? You know, we learned early on, and as we learned in the last interview, Chaucer, who influenced the poetry rhyming.
Yes.
You know, there has to be a certain rhythm that kind of keeps the movement going.
Yes, it does. And I write for a lot of different ages, but when I'm writing for the very, very young ones, I try to also get in that voice. I think, you know, I live in a tree house, and every day I climb the stairs to, I live in an old house, and we call the attic the tree house.
Okay,
and I go
thought
there
he really
every day.
lived in a tree house.
Yeah, right, and I do. That's what I tell you. But when I get up there and I turn on my computer, I look out the window, I'm 8 years old again. Or in this case, I'm 4 or 3. And I try to think of the world that way, and I try to write in that. And the rhythms that come out of the voice of a child, and I listen to my grandchildren and children I'm around, but also I try to go back to my own rhythms. And each book, or in this case, each series, has its own voice, thus its own rhythm. And sometimes I let it tell me where it needs to go and how to keep that going. And of course, these are in rhyme, so that rhythm and the rhyme pattern starts early on, like that one I just said. The alphabet parade, oh, what a sight to see, a band of marching letters all the way from A to Z. So I use that pattern all the way through as a child turns the pages, and each letter appears with a character from the carnival or the circus.
You know, last time you were here, you were headed to Europe, and so you've been traveling a lot, and
Yes.
the books are doing extremely well.
Well, we're having fun, and actually I'm excited because this month marks a milestone in my writing career. With these books, I now have 100 books published. I just discovered that. I've been keeping score, but a publisher was telling me this, and I have a new series following this. So we've just crossed the milestone.
Well, congratulations.
And it's all because of you having me here, being inspired.
There you go, just
you
like that.
keep the authors inspired.
We will work to 200. How's that?
200 next time.
Okay,
good.
there you go.
Thanks you
Charles
so much.
Ghigna, always a pleasure.
Appreciate
We've been
it.
talking with author Charles Ghigna. That's going to wrap it up from the Southern Kentucky Festival of Books. I'm Barbara Deeb. Thank you so much for joining us for Outside the Book.